Mr. Dar, your PID is logged on 101 unauthorized record.
Mohammed Dar operated without oversight for almost 3 years as an HMRC tax officer in Bradford. 101 strangers' tax records. Over £200,000. Not one person checked until the system he sat inside every single day finally turned on him.
Record edits between October 2019 and August 2022.
There's an explanation for that. Those were standard processing adjustments. I was following the
101 accounts you had no business reason to touch. £211,000 routed.
101 falsified tax records. 66 bank accounts. £211,715 and 21 pence drained out of the British public purse. Almost 3 years of insider fraud running quietly from a single back-office workstation in Bradford. By the time HMRC's anti-corruption investigators finished reconstructing the audit trail, the customer service consultant in this footage would be facing fraud and money laundering charges. And every fabricated entry would carry the same unique personal identifier number, logged the day he walked through the door. Quick question before we go any further. When was the last time you stopped to think about who is actually sitting on the other side of your tax records? The HMRC worker reading your file, the one with the login, the one whose only job is supposed to be making sure the numbers add up. Drop your honest answer in the comments. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. Because this channel covers the cases where the person paid to detect the fraud turned out to be running it. Mohammed Dar was born in Bradford, West Yorkshire, in the late 1980s, into a working-class British-Pakistani family settled in the dense terrace streets west of the city centre. By the time he was old enough to walk to school, the family had landed in Lister Hills, the tightly packed inner-city ward bordered by the university campus on one side and the Westgate Ring Road on the other. Princeville Street, where Dar would still be living 3 decades later, ran a short row of dark brick terraces with stone bay windows, satellite dishes bolted into the pointing, and a corner shop on the end that opened before dawn. His father worked the kind of hours that Bradford men of that generation worked, long shifts in the textile trade, and later behind the wheel of a private hire taxi, ferrying passengers up and down Manningham Lane and out to the airport on the moor. His mother kept the house, raised the children, and pushed school. There was no money for extras and no room for failure. The Dar children were expected to do well, get a steady job, and bring something home. By all accounts, Mohammed was a quiet child. Teachers at his primary school in the Great Horton catchment area would later describe him in routine end-of-year reports as polite, reasonably bright, easily distracted, but never disruptive. He liked numbers. He could do mental arithmetic faster than his classmates, and a Year 6 maths teacher noted in a school report that he showed strong aptitude for problem solving and worked best when given a clear set of rules to apply. The phrase that recurred across his school file was the same one that would later appear on his HMRC induction paperwork: reliable, detail-oriented, suited to procedural work. He went on to a large mixed comprehensive on the south side of the city, the kind of school where a quiet boy could disappear into the back row and come out the other end with a passable handful of GCSEs. He did not go to university. Instead, at 17, he picked up a Level 2 Business Administration qualification at Bradford College, the brutalist concrete campus a 10-minute walk from his front door, and started looking for office work. His first job paid £6.30 an hour, sorting paperwork in the back office of a logistics firm out near the Euroway Industrial Estate. He stayed for nearly 2 years. The reference his manager wrote when he left described him as punctual, accurate, and willing to take on the work nobody else wanted to do. He drifted through a couple of admin jobs after that. a claims handling role at a local insurance broker, 6 months on a temporary contract at a council benefits office in Manningham. Each post was a small step up in salary and a small step closer to the kind of stable, pensioned, white-collar career his parents had wanted for him. By his mid-20s, the obvious next move was the civil service. The civil service appeals to a very specific kind of Bradford ambition. It offers a salary slightly above the local average, a defined benefit pension, a flexitime arrangement, and a building you can walk to from anywhere in the city center. For someone whose family had spent a generation in textiles and minicabs, an HMRC office card on a Navy lanyard represented a quiet but real kind of arrival. Mohammed Dar applied, sat the online tests, attended an assessment day in a beige conference room in Leeds, and was offered a starting position as a customer service consultant in personal tax operations, based in Bradford. His induction took place over a fortnight in a training suite on an upper floor of HMRC's Bradford regional offices. There were 30-something new starters in the cohort, sitting at trestle tables with HMRC-branded notebooks and bottled water, working their way through modules on customer service standards, data protection, the civil service code, and the basics of the personal tax system. On the second morning, each new officer was issued their unique personal identifier, a string of digits that would attach itself to every single keystroke they made inside HMRC systems for the rest of their career. The trainer made a small joke that everyone laughed at politely. "Your PID," she said, "is how we know it was you. It follows you everywhere. Be careful with it." Dar wrote his PID down on the first page of his notebook in neat blue biro. He underlined it twice. He passed the induction comfortably. His probation reports, filed at 3 and 6 months by a line manager in the personal tax operations department, used phrases that would recur in his appraisals for years afterwards. Accurate, detail-oriented, works well independently, consistently meets expectations, demonstrates initiative on routine procedural matters. There was one note, buried in a 6-month review, that an experienced colleague had flagged him as occasionally going beyond his cue to pick up cases on his own initiative, a comment that, at the time, was treated as a positive. Eagerness, his manager had written, willing to learn the whole system. By 2018, he was settled. He had a permanent role processing business mileage expense claims and authorizing the corresponding repayments to taxpayers. He had a desk in an open-plan floor full of identical desks, a civil service pension contribution ticking quietly into the future, and a steady, unspectacular salary in the high 20s. He still lived on Princeville Street, a 10-minute walk from the office. He still saw his parents every week. He was engaged to be married. From the outside, his life was the small, durable success his family had wanted for him. What that summary did not capture were the private pressures already building underneath it. A growing wedding bill that the families on both sides expected to be a proper occasion. Venue hire, catering for several hundred guests, multiple outfits, jewelry, the long traditional list. A habit of playing online bookmakers in the small hours, which had started as a way to pass the time on quiet evenings, and had begun, by his late 20s, to leave marks on his current account. And, behind both of those, a drug problem that the court would later acknowledge as part of the picture without ever quite spelling out in detail. Mohammed Dar was, on paper, exactly the kind of officer HMRC was designed around. Reliable, procedural, knew the system, knew the controls, knew the PID followed him everywhere. He also knew, by the time he sat down at his workstation on 21st October 2019, precisely how much of the system was watched, and how much of it was not. To understand what Mohammed Dar did, you have to understand the small, unglamorous corner of HMRC he was sitting in. Personal tax operations is the back office of British income tax. It is not the headline-grabbing fraud investigation service. It is not the criminal taxes unit that chases offshore avoidance schemes. It is the floor of ordinary civil servants who deal with the daily traffic of the personal tax system. Coding notices, refunds, employer queries, expense claims. In Bradford, HMRC ran one of the largest such operations in the north of England, with hundreds of customer service consultants and administration officers working in shifts across multiple floors of a regional office block, processing claims that arrived by post, by phone, and increasingly through the online self-assessment portal. Business mileage expenses are one of the steadier streams of work. A taxpayer who has used their own car for work travel can claim tax relief at a set rate per mile against the cost of those journeys. The employee submits a claim. HMRC checks it against the taxpayer's record. If everything reconciles, a repayment is authorized and the money is paid into a nominated bank account. The vast majority of these claims are small, routine, and entirely legitimate. A district nurse driving between patients, a traveling salesman, a site engineer covering 3 counties in a van. Dar's job was to sit in that pipeline. He had access to taxpayer records, the kind of data the average member of the public never sees about themselves, let alone about strangers. He could view employment history, pay codes, declared income, previous claims, and the bank account details nominated for repayments. He could amend records where amendments were justified. He could authorize repayments up to a set monetary threshold without escalation. And he could see, on his screen, the box for the nominated repayment account, alongside the field that recorded how many miles of business travel were being claimed. The system around him was not blind. Every action he took inside HMRC's internal systems was tagged in the background with his unique personal identifier. Every record he opened, every field he edited, every repayment he authorized was written into an audit log alongside his PID and a timestamp. In theory, that log was the tripwire. In theory, anyone looking would be able to see, at any moment, exactly what every officer on the floor had done that day. But the log was not watched in real time. It existed to be reviewed when something prompted a review, an external complaint, an anomaly, an audit. The actual flow of work was controlled by queues. Customer service consultants picked claims from a shared queue, processed them, authorized them, and moved on. Throughput mattered. Speed mattered. The unspoken culture was that a good officer cleared their queue. Nobody, in the ordinary course of a working day, was looking over Dar's shoulder to ask why he had just opened the record of a taxpayer he had never spoken to, in a part of the country he had no caseload for, who had not asked him for anything. That was the gap. Not a hole in the system, a delay in the watching. The PID would catch him eventually. That was the entire point of having one. But eventually was a long time. Long enough, as it turned out, to push £200,000 of public money out of HMRC and into bank accounts of his choosing. The first record Dar touched outside his remit was logged at his workstation on 21st October 2019. It was a Monday. He had been in the office since just before 9. He had cleared a handful of legitimate mileage claims from the queue. Then, at a point in the morning that would later be reconstructed almost to the minute by investigators, he opened a taxpayer record that had not come to him through any queue, that had no live claim against it, and that had no connection to any caseload he had been assigned. He edited 2 fields. He generated a business mileage claim that did not correspond to any journey the taxpayer had ever made. He authorized the repayment. He nominated a bank account for it. The bank account was his. That first fabricated claim was small. Within the threshold he was allowed to authorize without escalation, large enough to be useful, small enough not to draw attention. The repayment went through overnight. By the next morning, the money sat in a current account at a high street bank on Great Horton Road under Mohammed Dayar's name. Nothing happened. No alarm rang. No supervisor asked. He waited a few weeks. Then he did it again. This is how the fraud started. Not as a plan drawn up on a Sunday afternoon. As a single edit made on a single morning, that worked. Once it had worked, the architecture built itself. By spring 2020, he had widened the technique. Instead of routing every repayment into his own primary account, which even to an inattentive bank would have started to look unusual, he began to nominate other accounts. Some belonged to family members. Some belonged to friends who, court papers would later show, were prepared to receive a payment on his behalf for a cut. Two of the names that emerged in the dock alongside him at Bradford Crown Court, Musa Hajat, then in his late 20s, and Arslan Ahmed, then in his early 30s, both also of Bradford, were among the people whose bank accounts received fraudulent repayments. They would later be dealt with on the basis that they were conduits, not architects. The 66 receiving accounts that investigators eventually identified were the visible shape of that architecture. Some were DARs, some were jointly held, some were in the names of associates, some were short-lived accounts opened, used, and quietly drained. The distribution mattered. Spreading the repayments across dozens of accounts meant no single account ever showed the cumulative figure. To any individual bank, the picture looked unremarkable. A one-off HMRC repayment of a few £1,000s paid into an account that already received normal incoming transactions. The full pattern only existed inside HMRC's own audit trail, where every one of those payments traced back to the same PID, the same workstation, the same officer. The 101 falsified tax records were the engine room. Each one was a real taxpayer with a real national insurance number, a real employment history, and a real HMRC file. Dar would open the record, identify the fields he needed to alter, edit them just enough to manufacture an apparent entitlement to a mileage repayment, generate the claim, and authorize the payment. The taxpayers themselves had no idea their records had been touched. They had not asked for a repayment. They had not driven the miles being claimed on their behalf. They would only learn much later, when HMRC wrote to them as part of the criminal investigation, that their personal files had been opened by a stranger sitting at a desk in Bradford and altered to feed a fraud. The cadence was deliberate. Not too many in a single day, not always for the same amount, not always to the same receiving account. He kept the volume down to a level that would not have flagged on any volume-based threshold, and rotated his methods enough that no single anomaly would stand out. Over the months he became, in his own quiet way, an expert in how to game his own employer. The money came in fast enough to start eating his problems. The wedding debt was the first thing to go. The lenders who had been chasing him through 2019 stopped chasing him through 2020. He paid down credit. He paid down a relative he had borrowed from. He kept gambling. That habit fed on the new liquidity rather than retreating from it. But the immediate pressure on his current account eased. Friends who saw him in those years would later describe him as calmer, more composed, more in control. A man whose life appeared, on the surface, to be working. The signs that something was off were small and easy to miss. A newer car parked outside the Princeville Street terrace that did not quite match his civil service salary. Visible jewelry at a family event. A run of cash purchases at restaurants on Leeds Road. None of it was conspicuous on its own. None of it provoked a question loud enough for an HMRC line manager 3 floors away to hear. The escalation continued through 2021 and into the summer of 2022. The last logged false claim was made on 19th of August, 2022. By that date, across 2 years and 10 months, Dar had touched 101 strangers' tax records, generated repayment claims that did not exist, and watched a total of £211,715 and 21 pence flow out of HMRC's repayment system into the 66 bank accounts he or his associates controlled. The audit trail recorded every single keystroke. Every one of them was tagged with his PID. The catalyst was not a whistleblower. It was not an angry taxpayer ringing the helpline. It was not a co-defendant losing his nerve. It was HMRC's own internal investigations team. The small, low-profile anti-corruption unit whose job is to look inside the building, not outside it, running the kind of pattern analysis they run routinely against the activity logs of customer service consultants who have access to taxpayer accounts and the ability to authorize repayments. The exact trigger, in the form internal investigations would never publicly describe, was an anomaly in Dar's access pattern. He had been opening more records than the typical officer in his role. He had been touching accounts that did not match the geographic distribution his queue should have produced. Mileage repayments authorized under his PID were routing to a set of bank accounts that appeared, statistically, more than once. Some of those bank accounts had cropped up against other officers' PIDs, not at all. Against his, they appeared and reappeared. Once the anomaly was flagged, the investigation moved quietly. Internal investigations does not announce itself. It does not warn the subject. The team began pulling Dar's full access history across the period in question. 3 years of logs, every record opened, every field edited, every repayment authorized, every nominated account, every timestamp. They did this while he was still at his desk. For weeks, possibly months, Mohammed Dar carried on processing claims at his workstation on the personal tax operations floor in Bradford. He sat under the same fluorescent lights. He clocked in at the same time every morning. He cleared his queue. He went home in the evening, walked the short distance back to Princeville Street, and slept in the same bed. Behind him, across an internal network he had never had reason to see, his entire 3-year audit trail was being mapped out, line by line, against the 101 modified taxpayer records and the 66 receiving bank accounts. The PID he had written down in blue biro on the first day of his induction was, very calmly, being used to assemble the case against him. He had not been caught yet. But the moment the audit team finished their reconstruction, he was finished. He kept going to work as normal. He had no idea. What internal investigations built over the course of their review was the kind of case that gets prosecutors out of bed early in the morning. At its center was a single spreadsheet, running to thousands of lines, that aligned 3 columns. The first column was every record Mohammed Dar's PID had touched outside his assigned queue during the relevant period. The second column was the corresponding edit. What fields had been changed, by what value, at what timestamp. The third column was the resulting repayment, including the amount, the date it cleared, and the bank account it had been paid into. For every one of the 101 falsified records, all 3 columns matched. The edit was logged under his PID. The repayment was authorized under his PID. The receiving account was either in his name, in a name traceable to a member of his household, or in the name of an associate whose bank account would receive multiple HMRC repayments over the period, every single one of them authorized by him. Investigators then took the second leg of the case, the money. They worked outwards from the 66 bank accounts. They obtained banking records under production orders. They reconstructed transfers. They watched how money paid into Hajat's and Ahmed's accounts moved, in tranches, back to accounts under Dar's direct control. They identified withdrawals in cash, transfers to gambling platforms, payments to credit cards in Dar's name. The full circuit closed. HMRC repayment authorized by Dar's PID, paid to a third-party account, transferred back to Dar, spent. The physical evidence followed. When officers eventually executed search warrants at the addresses linked to the operation, they recovered the kind of mundane material that fills modern fraud cases: mobile phones with messaging threads about transfers, bank cards in multiple names, paperwork tying receiving accounts to people in Dar's circle. Nothing dramatic. No cash hidden in a freezer. Just the ordinary digital and paper residue of a scheme that had been run from an office chair. Text messages recovered between Dar and one of his co-defendants, reconstructed in a later disclosure exercise, captured the everyday tone of the arrangement. Dar, March 2021. Should be in by the end of the week, same as last time. Co-defendant, how much? Dar, couple of grand, take your bit, send the rest back the usual way. Co-defendant, safe. There was no boasting, no reference to HMRC, no talk of risk. It read like two people moving petrol money. By the time the file landed on the Crown Prosecution Service's desk, the case was, in evidential terms, almost complete before any officer had spoken to Mohammed Dar. The audit log was the witness. The PID was the signature. The bank records were the corroboration. All that was left was to walk into the building where he lived and tell him the institution had been watching for longer than he realized. We are about to get to the moment officers turned up at his door. Before we do, if this kind of inside-the-system case is exactly what you came here for, take 2 seconds and hit subscribe and the notification bell. We cover insider fraud cases the mainstream news barely mentions every single week. The confrontation, when it came, did not happen on the office floor. It happened at his home address on Princeville Street, early in the morning, on a day when he had been due into work. Officers from HMRC's Internal Investigations Function, working alongside police, arrived with a warrant. He answered the door in everyday clothes. He had no warning. For the first few minutes, he tried the simplest defense available to anyone caught at the wrong end of an audit trail. He said he did not know what they were talking about. Mr. Dar, we're here in connection with unauthorized access to taxpayer records and the authorization of fraudulent mileage repayments from your workstation at HMRC Bradford. I haven't done anything wrong. I just process claims. That's my job. We've reconstructed the audit history under your personal identifier across the period from October 2019 to August 2022. We can put you on 101 records you had no business reason to access. That doesn't sound right. Anyone can be on a record. There's a whole floor of us. Each officer has their own PID. Yours sits on every edit, every repayment authorization, and the receiving accounts include yours, Mr. Dar. He stopped talking after that. The body language shifted from indignant to still. Shoulders down, eyes on the floor of his own hallway. The standard sequence followed. Caution, devices seized, a polite procedural request that he accompany officers to be interviewed. a solicitor instructed before any substantive answers were given. The last clear sentence he offered, before the formal interview, was quiet and almost domestic. "I want to speak to my family before this goes any further." That was the moment, his neighbors would later say, when the door of the terrace closed on the version of Mohammed Dar they had known. The case worked its way through the system at the pace these cases do. Dar was charged under the Fraud Act 2006 and the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002. The indictment alleged a course of conduct between 20 October 2019 and 19 August 2022, identifying him as the lead defendant in a scheme that had used insider access to HMRC personal tax operation systems to manufacture £211,715 and 21 pence in fraudulent mileage repayments across 101 falsified taxpayer records and 66 nominated bank accounts. Musa Hajat and Arslan Ahmed were charged on lesser bases, reflecting their role as conduits for the money rather than as architects of the fraud. The matter was listed at Bradford Crown Court, the squat stone building on Drake Street where most serious West Yorkshire cases pass through. The presiding judge was His Honour Judge Roger Thomas KC, a circuit judge with a long history of handling fraud work in the region. The prosecution presented the case in the form the audit trail had effectively written for them. The PID log on one screen, the modified records on another, the bank flows on a third. Prosecutors described Dar to the court as the leading player in the scheme, the officer whose access, knowledge, and PID had made every fraudulent repayment possible. The sentencing hearing was on Friday, the 4th of December, 2025. The public gallery held members of Dar's family. Defense counsel offered the personal mitigation that the file would carry into appeal if any of it traveled further. A gambling habit that had grown into a serious problem. Outstanding wedding debt that the family had felt unable to refuse. Drug addiction issues that had been a private weight on him for years, and a guilty man who had, his counsel said, lost everything that mattered to him in the moment he opened the first unauthorized record on a Monday morning in October 2019. Judge Thomas KC was unmoved by the size of those private pressures relative to the size of the breach. "You worked," the judge said, addressing Dar directly from the bench, "for the institution whose job it is to ensure that other people's tax claims are honest. You held a position of trust that exists precisely because the public has to be able to rely on the people inside HMRC, not running the very scheme they are paid to detect. Over almost 3 years, with your own unique identifier sitting on each entry, you opened 101 strangers' tax records, altered them without their knowledge, and used your authority to push over £200,000 of public money into bank accounts you and your associates controlled. The personal pressures placed before me by your counsel are real. They are not, in this court, an answer to what you did. They are the reason you did it." He sentenced Mohammed Dar to 3 years imprisonment. Hajat and Ahmed were each handed 12-month community orders with a requirement to complete 180 hours of unpaid work. The judge made clear that the disparity in sentence reflected the disparity in role. The architect of the fraud was sitting in the dock between them. A proceeds of crime hearing was listed for the 21st of May the following year, at which the financial recovery question, how much HMRC will get back, against what assets, by what means, will be determined. The figure of £211,715 and 21 pence will sit at the top of that hearing. Dar was taken down from the dock at Bradford Crown Court the same afternoon and processed into the prison estate. He will serve his sentence in the ordinary way for a first-time fraud defendant of his profile, a Category C establishment within the northern region, with eligibility for release on license at the usual point of the sentence. He will not work again at HMRC. He will not work again in any role requiring access to taxpayer data. The civil service career that took him a decade to build ended the morning the warrant landed on Princeville Street. His personal identifier number, the same one the trainer had warned him about on the second morning of his induction, the one he had underlined twice in blue biro in his HMRC notebook, was the single fact that had decided the case. It had followed him, exactly as he had been told it would, every step of the way. From the first edit on a Monday morning in October 2019 to the last repayment in August 2022, every keystroke had been tagged, somewhere on a server, to him. The institution he had been paid to protect had, in the end, protected itself with the most boring tool it had: a unique number on a login, a timestamp, a log. This case was quiet. The next case on the right-hand side is the opposite: louder, faster, and uglier. Click it now.